Good evening. I'm Penelope McPhee, the president of the Arthur M. Blanc Family Foundation. On behalf of Arthur and his family, I'm excited to welcome you this evening to our Speaker Series program. And I want to give a special thanks to Arthur Blanc and several of our other board members who are here, Roz Brewer, Elise Eplin, Bill Bowling, and we're expecting a few more family members. Arthur and his family had the vision to convene a community series about issues they're passionate about. And our staff, under the leadership of John Baer, whom some of you know, is honored to try to bring their idea to life. We've been hosting these programs since 2007, and tonight's program has generated an especially high level of interest. Thanks to all of you for squeezing into our space, and thanks to those of you who are viewing our live stream channel. On the program tonight, we're blessed to have some of the country's most important leaders from the field of civil rights, documentary filmmaking, and education. I encourage all of you to review their bios that are in your programs. Tonight's program is very personal to me. In 1985, I had the opportunity that every journalist would envy: the chance to interview Dr. King's closest colleagues about their recollections of the man, the movement, and the work they saw still ahead. Writing the book King Remembered with civil rights photographer Flip Schulke was life-changing for me. And it was during my first visit to Atlanta that I met Dr. C.T. Vivian, who is with us tonight. I'm thrilled to have the chance to interview Reverend Vivian again. Our program tonight is one of those rare win-win-win opportunities, a sort of triple victory. First, our foundation appreciates the power of documentary film to transmit true and accurate accounts of history, an attribute that gains value every day in our current culture. But more than just serving as a source of information, documentary films can inspire and encourage audiences to take action. Peter Kuhnhardt's film, King in the Wilderness, is a treasure because it succeeds as both a trusted source of history and as a call to action. Which brings me to our second win. The central takeaway is that all of us here in this room must, to paraphrase HBO's description of the film and the time period it covers, we must remain unshakably committed to nonviolence in the face of an increasingly unstable country. Dr. King made a radical choice to choose the path of nonviolence, no matter the demon in front of him. And he made that choice consciously every day. Among the many who are carrying this message today, we're especially grateful to Jackie Glover and HBO for delivering the message of nonviolence into millions of American homes. Which brings me to our third win: the never-ending journey to ensure that the next generation preserves the legacy of Dr. King and his contemporaries, honors their values, and remains as fiercely committed as Bernard LaFayette and C.T. Vivian to the pursuit of the beloved community. Throughout tonight's program, you'll learn how Peter Kuhnhardt and HBO have joined together to make King in the Wilderness more than a single documentary. By reimagining the content, not as a single program, but as a collection of jewels that can be arranged and rearranged for different audiences, they're expanding opportunities to reach all kinds of audiences, and especially students. Many of the young people, by the way, whom you see here tonight, are part of our American Explorers Leadership Program. So I think you saw some of them when you came in, and hopefully they'll be part of the beneficiaries of Peter's documentary. We're doing our part by investing financially in these education innovations and by supporting hands-on training for teachers and students. Just yesterday, as a matter of fact, teachers at Dr. King's alma mater, Washington High School on Atlanta's west side, received a training session so that they could then know how to use these documentary segments as part of their classroom education. By connecting these links in a chain with Dr. King's contemporaries, now forever bound to these students, we're celebrating the idea that the arc of the universe bends towards justice, and we're adding our collective effort to do a little more bending tonight. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jackie Glover from HBO.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'd first like to thank the Arthur M. Blanc Family Foundation for hosting this event. Thank you to Arthur Blanc, Penny McPhee, and John Baer and his team for making it all happen and bringing us together. I also have to mention how humbled I am to be in a room with Reverend Dr. Bernard LaFayette and Dr. C.T. Vivian, and moved by all the civil rights leaders who appear in the film. King in the Wilderness is a film that presents the complexity of Dr. King and his work. It is important to know that Dr. King was more than just, "I have a dream," and that speech. Yes, he had a dream, but he wasn't naive. And in the last 3 years of his life, the period covered in this film, he stood by his convictions in the face of criticism from many allies. Now, more than ever, it's important to understand what King stood for and the personal sacrifices he endured. Dr. King was a human being, like any one of us. He wasn't a one-dimensional superhero, and it's important for young people to know this. Things were difficult, and he suffered, but understanding his humanity lets us know that we too can do the difficult work if we care enough to see a just society. Although King was not a superhero, he was a hero. He has shown us the way through nonviolence and radical action that change and progress are possible. I think from King in the Wilderness, we learn the fight for equality and justice may be a lifelong struggle, but it is our duty, in honor of Dr. King, to always continue the fight. I am so proud that HBO has produced King in the Wilderness, which not only preserves Dr. King's legacy, but also presents the nuances of his message. It was an honor for us at HBO to work with Taylor Branch and the esteemed filmmaking team at Kuhnhart Films. Producers Teddy and George Kuhnhart and director and executive producer Peter Kuhnhart's passion for wanting to tell this part of Dr. King's story was irrepressible. We knew at HBO that this film had to be made. I'd now like to present the HBO trailer for King in the Wilderness.
Swing, Civil Rights, King, roll 20, sound 36.
Martin Luther King Jr. was a human being, and he was imperfect. He was conflicted, but his love was unchallengeable.
We have an opportunity to inject morality in the veins of our civilization.
We were trying to redeem the soul of America from racism, war, and poverty.
We're dealing with issues that will call for a restructuring of American society.
The most difficult time of his life was the 18 months before his assassination.
I will continue to preach nonviolence.
I do not know that everything that Martin said or did, he was quite prepared for.
In the middle of all that was the rising of the Vietnam War.
Dr. King made the decision that he had to be against the war.
These people are damning me when I say you ought to be nonviolent toward little brown children in Vietnam. Stick with civil rights!
He said, my friends are turning on me.
He was devastated.
Do you fear for your life?
It isn't so important how long you live. The important thing is how well you live.
Attacks and the criticisms on him were getting more and more vicious.
I'm gonna march if the spirits say march.
The FBI was constantly investigating King.
We will not tolerate lawlessness.
I'm gonna march if the spirits say march.
Dr. King looked me straight in the eye and said, if you can't drive, you run.
If the spirits say march.
You can't run, you walk.
I will march, oh Lord.
You can't walk, you crawl.
I'm gonna march if the spirits say march. If the spirits say march. If the spirits say.
But keep moving forward.
March if the spirits say march.
Thank you. I would now have Maya Mumma, the editor of King in the Wilderness, come up, and she's going to say a few words. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The task of editing a film can feel very, very daunting when you start. In order to explore history in a film like King in the Wilderness, our team scours archives across the world for source materials, for archival video, audio, family photographs, news broadcasts, anything that we can find to illuminate history and tell a story and to engage audiences. When I sat down to edit King in the Wilderness, I had 692 video and audio clips, 516 documents and newspaper articles, and 1,413 photographs. But for me and for the film, some of the most important material that I had to work with were the 9 interviews that we conducted for this film. There were interviews with people such as Andrew Young, Harry Belafonte, Marion Wright Edelman, Jesse Jackson, Diane Nash, Cleveland Sellers, Zernona Clayton, John Lewis, Dorothy Cotton, Bernard LaFayette, and C.T. Vivian. These 19 interviews are people who knew King, who walked beside him, who worked with him. They're people who both witnessed history and they also made history in their own rights. As an editor and as documentary filmmakers, their willingness to sit in front of our cameras and share their stories, their ideas, and their viewpoints, it's so vital to being able to shape a film that brings history to life for new generations. As Clarence Jones says towards the beginning of the film, if surviving lions don't tell their stories, the hunters will get all the credit. And I believe that history is best learned from the mouths of those who witnessed it, from those lions. However, when we're finished editing a film, only a fraction of the material that we work with actually makes it into a film. Then everything is put on a hard drive and put away on a shelf, and very few people get to experience what we as filmmakers get to see in the process of making the film, get to watch every single second of every single interview that we conducted. This film is very different, and it's been a real honor to be involved in the process of bringing together all the resources that we've gathered for this film, namely the words of our witnesses, their interviews, to share with the public and to educate others. Through this project, we're preserving their testimonies for generations and generations to come. Tonight, we have 2 of those witnesses, 2 of those lions here with us. Our first panel, we're going to have Bernard LaFayette and C.T. Vivian, along with executive producer and historian Taylor Branch. And again, their full bios are in the programs if you'd like to read more about them. Now we're going to watch a 5-minute excerpt from King in the Wilderness. It's a scene from about 20 minutes into the film. We're going to be joining King and his colleagues when they have decided to try and take the civil rights movement from the South to the North.
I do not know that everything that Martin said or did, he was quite prepared for. He had felt that in many ways, dealing with the South was a more predictable outcome because in the North, the racial hypocrisy was very subverted. It gave the appearance of being not like the South. The South was the center of all evil, and the North was a place of a higher experience. And Dr. King said, no, that's not the case.
We moved into an apartment on 16th and Hamlin. It was a walk-up apartment with no lights, no heat, and it took quite an adjustment. I never got scared in the South. I knew the dangers. And I was prepared to get killed in the South. But I wasn't ready to, to have a junkie stick a knife in me in the middle of the night, coming into that apartment for maybe $15 or $20 that I had in my pocket.
That first night was a very cold night, and I got really worried that there weren't going to be enough blankets. So we went and got the blankets and went over to see Dr. King in his apartment. And as we were sitting there, the doorbell rang, and there was a young man there. The first thing he said when he came in the door was, "Are you really Martin Luther King?" They had a very lovely conversation with Dr. King really saying, "We want you to join the movement." And pretty soon later, there was another knock on the door, and there was like a whole train of them going down the stairs. And those young men came back a number of times to see Dr. King.
People in the community, they would just hang around waiting for him to come downstairs, so they could see him. But he would invite them in, sit down and talk to people. They didn't think he was the kind of person they could talk to. Then it made them feel, well, honestly, that they were worthwhile as well.
Martin understood that if you ran with folk, you could organize folk. Remember, we've spent all of our lives being hated in one form or the other. But when we see somebody who really cares for people, period, right? That person is worth knowing.
The first week we moved in, the temperature dropped to about 16 degrees below zero. And people came to us to complain that they had no heat. And to find babies wrapped in newspaper, we had to start firing the furnaces. So we got all the money we could, and we got enough coal to get all of the furnaces to work. We call the movement in Chicago the movement to end slums. And it plunged us into several issues. One was the area of poor housing. The other was the area of quality education and also unemployment.
I feel like we know more about our problem than Dr. King because we live here.
What would you suggest that he do, Reverend Mitchell?
I would suggest when they come down to our city, he should get the hell out of here.
So the first time we ran into stiff black resistance. We'd never met that in Montgomery, Birmingham, or Selma before. That was different.
A lot of the ministers were part of the patronage system. Mayor Daley's patronage system was one where people's jobs were handed out based on the number of votes that they could produce. They called it the Daley machine.
Martin had anxiety because, as he put it, we don't want to flunk. We don't want to fail in our projects.
I could not be more honored to be here with the three of you tonight. And I'm not going to do their formal introductions because you have their full bios. Well, not their full bios, but bios in your programs, and I hope that you will read them. And you saw both Dr. Vivian and Reverend LaFayette on the screen, and many of you know the work of Taylor Branch. I am particularly intimidated by Taylor Branch, and that's because when my book and which came out in 1968, which I co-authored with photographer Flip
86.
86, thank you. Came out in 1986, thank you. Taylor's book also came out, and it pretty much eclipsed every other book about Dr. King. So, so thank you all three of you for being here. It really is an honor. I'm going to start, Reverend LaFayette, with you, if that's okay, and we'll move around, and any of you can feel free to answer any of the questions that I ask each of you. But I want to start with that quote from Diane Nash when she quoted Dr. King as saying, "We don't want to fail." How much pressure and uncertainty do you think Dr. King and all of you felt when you moved north to Chicago? That was a very bold and different move. What did it feel like, and what did it feel like to him?
Well, first of all, our experience in the movement, civil rights movement, was mainly in the South. And there was no coincidence that a number of our major movements that resulted into some national change actually took place in Alabama. So that was no coincidence. That was familiar territory, and people had certain expectations, and they had a lot of knowledge of the people in Alabama. Moving north now, that was different. But I want to inject something here, because actually the invitation to come north actually was not necessarily Chicago in terms of being the first place. There was other places that wanted Martin Luther King to come to their communities and that sort of thing. The reason why Martin Luther King chose Chicago is several reasons. One was the fact that Jim Bevel was director of the direct action part of SCLC, and that's where he was, in Chicago. He came there because I was there, okay? And he said that's where he wanted to have a direct action movement there in Chicago. So Martin Luther King made that decision on the spur of the moment. It was a quick decision he made about Chicago. And there was a lot of resistance there. And as you saw on the film clip, there were certain ministers who were black and pastored Baptist churches who did not want Martin Luther King to come. In fact, it's a whole series of incidents, and I won't take all the time to go into them right now, except I get questions about, you know, the conditions there in Chicago. I went to Chicago first because I was invited by the American Friends Service Committee, the Quakers, to lay the groundwork for Chicago, because that was going to be our next movement. And I'll stop by just telling you that some of the marshals on the Selma movement, from Selma to Montgomery, some of the marshals were actually vice lords from the west side of Chicago.
Wow.
Lamar McCoy, you'll see him with a black tam. In those days, you know, they call them berets now, right? Okay, well, he had it on backwards. He has an American flag walking in front of Martin Luther King, okay, going into Montgomery. He was the head of the vice lords, Lamar McCoy. And a lot of the marshals were gang members, because I trained the gang members, and actually, that was the, you know, the training ground in Selma for the gang members who were the marshals in the Chicago movement.
Wow. Wow.
They tried out at least 5 other cities that I know in the North as testing grounds for a Northern movement. Boston, Philadelphia, Rochester, Cleveland, and Chicago. He went to a number of different places. And Boston was the first one, and it was within a month of the end of the Selma movement. He was in Boston, and everybody in Boston said, "We were with you in Selma," because they didn't want him to come. They didn't want him to
go
come
back
to
to Selma.
But the whole point was, he said, we have an opportunity and momentum to show the country that race in America has never been just about the South. It's not now, and it never has been. You know, it's a national issue, which seems elementary, but he said millions of people think the race issue is over because we passed the Civil Rights Bill in '64. So if nothing else, it was to take the moment to wake people up, to show them that the problem was bigger than they wanted to believe it was. And to do that knowing that they were going to lose a lot of sympathetic media coverage, because the Northern newspapers who loved covering Selma did not like it when the movement started up there. So it was a brave against a lot of resistance. But practically everything Dr. King did in King in the Wilderness was against a lot of his staff. A lot of them didn't want to go north. They didn't want him to come out against the war. They didn't want him to have a poor people's program, and they didn't want him to go to Memphis. And so there was a compulsion about him to make a witness that is the progression of the film.
And Reverend Vivian, do you think that he was caught off guard by the level of hatred and racism?
No, not at all. Remember, Martin went to college and for several years, and being in the North. Not only that, he was he was really a person like very few others. He had been all over the country, and as a result of being all over the country, he already was ready for everything that was happening. When you see Martin, you have to see something more than a person. Martin King was more than a normal man. All right, is that Martin knew what to do before he ever started to go. Right, Martin King was the kind of person that all of us would like to have been when we were in college and when we were in high school even, right? And everybody, after we started going there, everybody there wanted to be us.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Dr. King, the man. Bernard, the film mentioned that he brought people along because he loved people, and he just reached out to them, and he was almost like a Pied Piper in that respect. Talk a little bit about how he did that. How did he build those relationships?
It may seem a little extraordinary, but Martin Luther King had no discipline when it came to sharing what he had with others. He used to walk from his house down to the church, which was only about a block or so away, and then another block was the office. And sometimes he'd be broke by the time he got to the office, because he'd just give out, people standing on the corner and ask for money. they knew that Martin Luther King would be coming. And, he didn't, like some of us say, well, we see people asking for $1 or something, we ignore them. Because in our minds, we say they're going to take it and buy something illegal or something drunk or whatever. Or they just, we just encouraging and supporting beggars, and contributing to the poverty because they just, no, it didn't bother Martin Luther King. He'd give his money away, just like that. That's why he stayed broke. One time he went abroad, someplace, I forget where it was, CT, and before he left the airport, he was broke. He never got out of the airport, and these people, those days didn't have those restrictions. He, for example, I remember one time we were in the office, and Martin Luther King walked into the boardroom, and chairs were around the boardroom table. You know what I mean? And he walked in there and stepped on one of the chair legs, and he turned around and said, "Excuse me," I mean, it was a chair leg. And so I watched him, just behave in extraordinary ways. While he was so profound, there was something that was so simplistic about the way he related and really to other individuals and human beings. And so that was a thing. Now, he didn't make any bones about going to play pool. Now, I don't know whether he was that good or not because he had a lot of practice, or people were just nervous, You shoot pool with Martin Luther King, you know what I mean? But every place where we went, we used to stay up and drive overnight, and Martin Luther King's job was to sit in the front seat and tell jokes to keep the driver awake. You know what I mean? So there was something very ordinary about him, and as well as something extraordinary. He was a combination. Now, you never heard him tell any jokes in his speeches and stuff like that?
Right.
But he used to tell the best jokes. And he could imitate other preachers. That's the other thing he was really good at. Yes, he could hoop now. Okay, yeah. In fact, he almost did. I'm gonna tell you what, some of you watch films. When he was in Montgomery, Alabama, when they made that march from Selma to Montgomery, and remember he was speaking, and you saw him put his finger in his ear, just like CT is doing right now. That's a Baptist preacher's thing. That's when you're getting ready to tune up, you know what I mean? You hear yourself first, right? Is that right? Yeah.
CT, do you have any stories about his humor?
Martin wasn't a funny man. Martin was serious. Everything about him was really serious. We can pick out something for you where everybody's laughing, but if it's that, it's to bring on something else. Martin is already clear on what he wants to do and accomplish and go, right? And it's, but he was so serious that he didn't have to laugh to make it good.
Well, he clearly inspired tremendous loyalty among the men and women who were part of the movement and beyond. I'd love for any of the three of you to talk about what was the root of that loyalty.
Is that the fact that we were bringing forth a new society. We understood that, right? We understood that we were not about some little picky stuff, right? We were talking about changing the society. We were talking about making certain that those who had been beating us before was
going to find themselves in a whole nother world. And they did, right? We changed the best place of all, the South, right? We changed it, and it was nonviolent direct action that made the difference, and we have to see that exactly how it happens, how it happened, what kept us going, and made it so that we did not care about dying and all that sort of thing, right? Is because if you were going to, you were going to. But we knew that what we were about was more important than the kind of little piddling thing that we call life.
Wow.
Because, and remember, a good deal of us were already in seminary. We were daily, we were about thinking about how we changed the world. It was not an easy thing to think about for the average person, but it was a desire to make certain that we made certain that we were doing more than what 90% of the folk thought was important.
Taylor, you interviewed over many years many of Dr. King's closest colleagues. Does that resonate? What CT has just said, was that the theme that you heard from all of them?
Yeah, I think most people were struck by the sense of mission and the sense of humility and how they fit together so much. I mean, obviously I did not know him personally, so I couldn't feel that magnetism. But I think one time I was most struck by it was the documents about, he went to India in 1959 to learn more about Gandhian nonviolence, and which seemed to make sense. But the documents when he came back were both funny and profound, because he said, I went over there to study Indian nonviolence, and the most prominent nonviolent Gandhian, Nehru, was building the atomic bomb, which he said he needed for Pakistan. And he said the rest of the Gandhian nonviolent people had splintered into 1,000 sects. Some of them didn't want to step on bugs, and some of them fasted all the time. And he said, I knew that wouldn't work in the U.S. He said, those Indians have never had barbecue like we have. We're not going to fast. And he said, beside they're 95% of the people, we're 5 or 10%.
Right.
He said, we need our own form of nonviolence. But then he said, what we've got going for us is that Americans don't realize that their system is built on votes, and votes are nonviolent. So nonviolence is not something esoteric for vegetarians and, you know, vegans or something. Nonviolence, I mean, if we had an election and violence broke out and we didn't accept it, we'd all be shocked and say there was something profoundly wrong. And yet the flip side of that is not true, in the sense that everybody feels a commitment to study. He studied it, you know, the psychology of it, the structure of it, the politics of it, the religion of it, because he said it's essential to our system, and we're going to devise our own form of nonviolence here. Things like that are very, I mean, it was humble. He could tell these stories about the Gandhians over there and say, you know, we have to find our own model, because we can't just copy Gandhi, and we've got to go beyond. So that kind of story would be infectious to people.
Bernard, in those last years, the years that are covered in this film, in this documentary, there was obviously a great deal of pressure on the nonviolent movement, and a lot of folks pushing back against nonviolence. How did Dr. King react to the Stokely Carmichaels and to the other point of view about this that really was a direct challenge to his not just his point of view, but his whole makeup.
One of the things that Martin Luther King did was to draw from many different sources. So he did not simply just stay, for example, with the New Testament. Like, for example, we're talking about what he drew from Mahatma Gandhi. Not everything. He didn't agree with everything Gandhi said. Okay? There was Thoreau. Okay, there were others. And Hegel. Now, back to your point, Hegel was a philosopher, German, okay? And the whole idea of the thesis and antithesis, the opposite was just as important to Martin Luther King. So therefore, he read, when we traveled with him, the conservative newspapers as well as the liberal newspapers, and particularly the editorials. Okay, when we traveled with him, he read about 5 newspapers a day, going from one city to another, okay? And so he was interested in what the other people said. Like, he would be watching, the news programs that come on today that you would consider conservative. We don't need to call the name of them. He'd be just as interested in that point of view. So what he would do, like Hegel, he would listen to both sides, the opposite, like we do as professors. We want to know the thesis and the antithesis. As my mother would say, the antithesis. Okay? And then from there, you would get a synthesis. So when Martin Luther King came to conclusions, they were not one-sided. Okay? He was just as concerned about the conditions of poor white people. That's why he mounted that Poor People's Campaign. All right? So therefore, when you talk about Martin Luther King and following a particular philosophy, no, he was eclectic. He even drew from the military. Well, look, he had Bevel on his staff, head of direct action program. Right. Bevel was a gunner on the Navy ship. Gunner on the Navy ship. Then he had Hosea Williams, who was really military. Okay? Yeah. So what he did was he drew from what their strategies were and the way they thought and the way they put things together, and he was able to form a strategy. As C.T. was saying, Martin Luther King's strategy, it wasn't just a philosophy of nonviolence, it was the strategy that he used. And this is what we want our young people to understand today, not when they watch film and that sort of thing, what's behind it? How was it put together? Why did Martin Luther King turn around Tuesday, going to the march from Selma to Montgomery? They called it Turnaround Tuesday. And he got criticized by people like Stokely and others because he didn't, and even James Foreman, okay? They didn't understand that Martin Luther King could not break an injunction issued by a federal court if he was expecting to go and march to Selma, Alabama, to Montgomery to get the federal government to protect us from the state, okay, government who shot Jimmy Lee Jackson. So you don't violate a federal injunction if you're asking the federal government to come and give you support. So, but he didn't have time to explain all that. Stokely came around, by the way. I want to make clear on that. I know Stokely personally.
And then left the country.
When he came around, yeah. It was a good idea. But he was there on the front row in the Dexter Avenue church, no, not Dexter, Ebenezer Church, okay, when Martin Luther King made the statement about Vietnam and making his church a sanctuary for those who were refused to go to the military. Stokely was sitting on the front seat, okay, of the church when it happened. They would have grown closer together, just like Malcolm X would have drawn closer together. I was there, I watched it. I saw them, I heard the conversations that were going on. And had they lived, okay, had he lived, and the others, there would have been a closer relationship that was being built. Now, Martin Luther King only served in the movement 12 years.
Right.
Okay? But you must know, based on what C.T. was saying right there, that I've heard him say over and over again, Martin Luther King, he was surprised that he lived as long as he did. When Kennedy was assassinated, he was sitting at the dining room table. He said, when he saw it on TV, he said, that's the same thing that's going to happen to me. So death was not one of the things that interfered with his strategy or the life that he lived. In fact, he's the one that said, if you haven't found anything worth dying for, you haven't yet lived.
That's right.
Taylor, you've known these two gentlemen for over 30 years, and they, like most of the members of the movement, were very, very young men when they were changing the world. Talk a little bit about the generational element to the movement, because I want to go back to what Bernard said about the young people who are here tonight and how they should think about this as a model.
Yeah, it's deceptive looking back on it, because we think of him, King, as the elder statesman now, when he was only 39 when he was killed. Jim Foreman, who was talking about the radical far to his left, was older than Dr. King, and he was the head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. So it was strange. A lot of people were young. I think one signal thing about it for me was that Dr. King was the only one of the, quote, adult civil rights leaders who instantly praised the sit-ins when they occurred. The NAACP didn't like sit-ins and actually didn't take them seriously. Originally thought they were like panty raids, that young college kids can't be doing anything serious. Dr. King instantly said, this is a breakthrough because you can't boycott a place that won't let you in. You have to figure out a way to take nonviolence. And he said there's some aspects of human nature that are so stubborn that a sermon alone won't do it. You've got to put forward sacrifice, and these kids have learned how to do it. So the fact that college students and people not much older than college were on the forefront of this movement is a signal lesson that is really hard to communicate. That they were studying with people like C.T. and Jim Lawson in Nashville, studying nonviolence when they're in school, but the next thing you know, they're leaders. The Freedom Rides were created by young people. They kept refusing to let them die, and that kind of leadership is quite rare. You never know when in your life the period when you're going to be tested and give your most valuable witness is. And in that era, to a large degree, it was people in their 20s.
C.T., what advice would you give young people today who are struggling, fighting for equity and inclusion? What from your perspective as a young man would you bring to them today?
To learn about nonviolence, practice it, and then make certain that you go do it, all right? And that because it's not important until you do it, all right? And it has to be seen that way, is that you get up to go do it, all right? And in the doing it, you change the world. And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to do something if they have somebody to really teach them and lead them, all right? And how many people are willing to get hurt, die. Well, we don't have many of those right now, but But there was a time when it was just our understanding, right? We would know about a place to go and just go. Is that we joined each other to make certain that we actually changed things, right? We didn't, just sound good and look at something, right? But the idea is that how do you do it? And don't mind being afraid, all right? Because that's a part of it. And we also went to practice before we did time after time, right? Is that it's but once you do it, it's no problem. It's no problem because you're committed to more than the matter of sounding good and looking good. And you're more than any of that, right?
Bernard, I want to ask you the same question. What would you say to young people today who are trying to make a difference? What advice would you give them? What route would you suggest to them?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is that you do some serious research so you'll be able to understand why certain conditions exist. Not just protest the condition, but understand why. Like, for example, when I went to Selma, Alabama, nobody would go. I went to get my assignment here in Atlanta, and James Foreman told me that, no, there was an X on the blackboard. I started to bring some of my books, but I forgot to call and ask whether it was okay or not. But it's about the Selma movement. It's called In Peace and Freedom, My Journey in Selma. That would really give you the foundation of understanding how the Selma movement got started. And they didn't want to go. They weren't going. X. They had sent 2 teams of people down to Selma, Alabama, and I don't call the names of the people who were on the teams because some of them are still around. And it's not necessary, to say, well, they rejected Selma, and the results was, quite different from what the perception was. And understanding why they rejected Selma. And both teams came back independently with the same conclusion, but also with the same reason that they felt nothing could be done in Selma. And why? Same reason. White folks were too mean and black folks were too scared. And you get scared black folks and mean white folks, nothing's gonna happen, okay? That was the conclusion they'd come to. They went to go on to Mississippi with Bob Moses, Charles Sherrod, okay, in Southwest Georgia, okay? But no, not Selma. And we thought the mean white folks were actually from Mississippi. That's what, that was the invitation. But CT will remember this because he was on the bus with us. When we left out of Montgomery, Alabama, going to Jackson, Mississippi, because we got beaten up, the students in Montgomery.
Yeah.
And I should tell you this so that you know, CT used to be my homiletics teacher, and we ended up being cellmates on the Freedom Riot. Stayed up all night long. Our birthdays only one day apart, day, not years now. And we used to do puns all day and all night. Okay, so we never did sleep in jail. No rest. Okay, but anyway, if you remember, they had armed guards now by this time, Alabama National Guard, going into Jackson, Mississippi. We did not go through Selma, Alabama. It's on Highway 80, right straight through. We bypassed Selma. That's how I remember Selma, okay? Why they went through all these other parts of the South and everything, but not Selma. So the first thing I did when I told James Foreman, he said, now, well, no other assignments. He said, now, you want to go take a look at it? I said, no, I'll take it. I took Selma. So I said, the first thing I want to do is study and read. I did a 50-page paper on Selma, Alabama before I even set foot in Selma. I didn't go running into Selma, Alabama. I can tell you some things about Selma that you would never know because it's not even in the documentaries. It ever occurred to you that they bombed churches and they bombed schools and they bombed this, that, and the other all over Alabama, all over Montgomery, all over Birmingham, all over Mississippi, all over not one bomb in Selma. I know why.
Come on, tell us. Come on.
One black person was killed in the Selma movement, and how many whites? Even Ms. Lozo, and the march was over.
That's what happened.
Okay? Yeah. White people were killed in Selma.
Yeah.
I know. Why? Okay? Study. So the first thing I would say for you to do, research and study and understand that the first capital of Alabama was not in Montgomery, Alabama. It was in Dallas County. Okay? Yeah. I can tell you a lot about it because I did the study and the research beforehand. All right? 8 families controlled all of Dallas County. If you work for any of those families, you never had to worry about no, income or political position. Jim Clark, you know who his uncle was? Big Jim Folsom, Jim Clark's uncle.
I didn't know that.
I know. That's what I'm talking about. Okay. Do your research and do your study. Don't take for granted. And to give you another example, and I'm glad most of y'all sitting down, okay, because I wouldn't tell you. The original Ku Klux Klan was not a racist organization. The KKK? No, they were nice white gentlemen who went after other white gentlemen who didn't take care of their children. Because who would take care of the children if they didn't, okay? If you didn't take care of your children, that meant the other white men had to take care of them. That was original. They split during the Reconstruction period and became racist because they wanted to run the black elected officials out of office. I'm talking about research. So I said enough on research, okay?
But you're going to tease these people about why there were no bombings in Selma?
Half of it I got from your book.
So Taylor, are you going to tell us why there were no bombings in Selma?
Oh, he opened it up.
The next thing is...
Wait a minute, Bernard.
What you want to implement, if it's something you want to implement, you must already, okay, exercise it if you want to implement it. So what I'd like to see is a youth legislature right here in the state of Georgia where every high school is in a congressional district. Elect yourself ages 12 to 17. Have an election among these young people. It's like you have driver's education, have citizenship education. All those 12, they should know who their elected officials are. They should know who their appointments are, okay? And they should know these people. That's part of what they should be studying. They don't have to do it in school. You can do it out of school. But they should do that. If they get practice being elected, then you also get a chance as a young person to see who the leaders really are among your peers. Okay? Because the problem is that when you graduate from elementary school and high school, they're going off in different directions. No, keep them into a community. All right?
Good idea.
Okay, so that's the next thing. Practice what you want to
do.
Yeah, that's what the CT was saying, okay? Now, the next thing I'd like to see them do, all right, is to study nonviolence in terms of being trained in it. So you would understand that it wasn't just the marches and demonstrations and protests that brought about the change. It was strategies of winning the majority, because no revolution has ever been successful unless you had the active participation and the sympathy of the majority. Nonviolence worked because Martin Luther King was able to win the majority. Look at the March on Washington. That's why the bill was passed. Okay, it wasn't protest. It was, hey, the fact that the majority of white people, the Supreme Court decision, who was on the Supreme Court? The white folks passed those civil rights bills. Black folks ain't passed no civil rights bill because they weren't even on the vote. They couldn't even vote. So how are they gonna make a difference? White people did it. That's my point. You must be able to win the support of the majority. And that's the thing that made all the difference in the world. And the other thing is, thing that made the biggest difference was when we started identifying us as a larger group. They used to call us colored, they used to call us Negroes, then they used to call us blacks. Now, when they call us African Americans, that meant that we were with the majority, because all the white folks originally came from Africa.
So we are going to wind down on that note.
We lost one, but I mean, you know, the rest of them.
I want to see from our timekeepers, do we have time for a few questions? No? No questions? Okay. Well, then I'm going to thank our guests very much.
Penelope.
Really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, my dear.
Good evening. I'm Peter Kuhnhart, and you got a sense there of the amazing storytelling that we were lucky enough to record. To have each of these gentlemen sit down with Taylor Branch for 3 to 4 hours and talk about Martin Luther King was something that we knew was enormously important. Along with my sons, George Kuhnhart, who's here tonight, and Teddy Kuhnhart, early this year we established the Kuhnhart Film Foundation. We did it along with our partner, HBO, because we recognized that King in the Wilderness needed to be brought into classrooms in a way that has never been done before. This would never have happened without the support of our host tonight, the Arthur M. Blanc Family Foundation. So I offer our deepest thanks to Arthur and his family. And I want to thank Penny McPhee for bringing us all together tonight, for hosting this evening. And I want to thank John Baer and his wonderful staff. John saw our King in the Wilderness film at Sundance, and he flew right to New York to talk to us about education. It was John who put us together not only with the Blanc Foundation, but with Blue Shift, a superb educational team you will hear from in a minute. We conducted 19 interviews for this documentary. Those interviews totaled 39 hours of eyewitness history, stories and memories from people who knew and worked with Dr. King. Most of these witnesses were in their 80s, so we were very aware that capturing and preserving their stories was an historical imperative. When we completed the interviews, we realized that we were sitting on something really significant. Even though the documentary is narrated entirely by our eyewitnesses, less than 5% of our interviews made it into the film. The other 95% would be put into boxes and never seen by anyone. they would essentially be lost. That's how the documentary world operates. So we decided to change the system. We realized that all 39 hours of personal memories of Dr. King should be made public and available to teachers and students and scholars. On a university level, we asked the nonprofit JSTOR to test if digital access to our King materials can be integrated directly into college-level courses. And that testing is now underway. On a high school level, we decided to make all the interviews in their entirety, along with customized teaching tools, available online for free using the power of YouTube. Our website, which we are launching tonight, is not only important for the future study of King, but we believe it will be a permanent repository for thousands of more interviews on different subjects. And this archive, which we are calling the Interview Archive, will change the way young people learn about civics, about history, current events, and moral leadership. We are launching our site here in Atlanta, not simply because Dr. King lived here, but because the Blanc Family Foundation had the foresight to get us working with schools early on and connect us with a group of former teachers at Blue Shift Education. They are a remarkable company. They saw the potential of what we were trying to do, and they made it happen. So tonight's launch is a milestone for Kuhnhart Film Foundation and for all the people here tonight who made this possible. It is my great pleasure to introduce the co-founder of Blue Shift Education, a teacher and educator for 25 years, whose passion for justice and whose commitment to education made her the perfect partner. Ladies and gentlemen, Fran Sterling.
If we could have the first slide up, that would be great. So some people in the room might recognize this, yeah? All right, that's great. Some of those claps, what is this? Washington High School. The Booker T. This is where myself and my colleague Jen Sarche had the great pleasure of launching the King in the Wilderness education platform last night. And some of the teachers, shout out, put your hands up. They're here, right? Yeah. Teachers don't get enough of that love, so thank you. We had a good introduction yesterday, but it was just an introduction. And tonight we're going to layer that introduction a little bit more with some teasers for you to see, to go to the website. As Peter mentioned, it just is live today. So you are the first to see it in a minute. So this is Washington High School, and so we're imagining ourselves in a classroom just for a few minutes now. So bear with me. Hopefully your high school experience was positive, that you feel enriched by it, that you had amazing teachers, that you are who you are because of what you experienced from your years in school. And I think we could all thank that and appreciate that. So since we've brought up quite a few times tonight the idea of nonviolence, and I know that that is important both to HBO and to the Kuhnhart Family Foundation and to the Blanc Family Foundation tonight for bringing us, we thought we'd start there. So imagine just for a minute if you were in a classroom, maybe here. When you think of nonviolence, what images come to your head? Who do you think about? Certainly we had some amazing stories tonight. What first comes into your head when you think about that? And I'd like you to indulge me for a minute and just turn to somebody that's near you and tell them what came to mind very quickly. You could turn around. Okay. So as you can see, if I can bring you back here. Imagine a classroom, right? So that was about a minute. And hopefully maybe that'll inspire you to go back to school, maybe. But in a moment's time, because of what we heard tonight, because of the film clips that we've already seen, and because of our background knowledge of what you bring into the room, each of us come to this with different knowledge, with different experiences, with different images and different points of reference. And that's what we need to navigate as we bring this amazing film and interview archive to life. There's a lot of different ideas that people brought into this film through their interviews, and we even saw it on the panel tonight. How do you navigate that? Well, there's not one specific recipe to do that. So the challenge is, how do you allow to have resources that teachers can use in flexible ways, have a life of their own? So if we could go to the next slide. This is, and I think we're going to go live. Am I live? Yes. So you are the first to see this, besides those of us who've worked on it. And you can write down now, and I know our panel will also talk about that in a minute, the website address, because it's not anywhere, it's secret. No, it's not secret. It's www.kuhnhardtfilmfoundation.org. You can check it out now. But we're going to look at a few things here right now in the short time that we have. And you can see at the top navigation bar, there's the film archive, the interview archive that Peter mentioned, and the educator resources, which is where we're going to go first. So here you see 3 sections, primary sections, with a wonderful quote from Zernona Clayton that I just have to say because it really framed how we did this work. I tell the story of Martin Luther King and Coretta King as I knew it. I lived it. I value all of what they gave me now that I can remember. I'm not just telling stories. I'm not making a speech. I'm telling you what happened. And just like the quote that Maya mentioned with the lions, I think this quote really stands out of what does it mean to tell what happened. And so here we are looking at 3 sources. I'll pull this up a little bit more. Oops. That was me, not the website. We have a set of 6 lessons, a screening guide that just went live today, and the interviews, the 19 interviews that people have mentioned. Now, this is all accessible for teachers anytime they want. When we go into the lessons, we're going to look at one particular idea tonight, quickly. I wish it was a real classroom, we would have all the time that we could. But here's the 6 lesson themes that we pulled out, and there were countless. This is where we landed, thinking not only what could be aligned in classrooms, what could be aligned to standards that teachers need to fulfill, but what really resonates today and what is relevant today. What are the most salient, the most important things that we know this film illustrates, but also that students really need to learn. So we have, as you see, Understanding the Man, which was brought up a little bit already, women in the movement. There's some amazing stories and history that's taught in this film that even those folks who might think that they know a lot about women in the civil rights movement walk away with, oh, I didn't know that. So we focus on that very purposefully. Philosophy of the movement, we're going to look at in a minute around nonviolence. Strategy of the movement, challenges to the movement, in particular, the stand against the war in Vietnam and the FBI surveillance, and then we certainly end with legacy. So these 6 are capstones that teachers can land on, and when you enter in, you will see this, which I'm not going to read the text, but on the left hand, this is how teachers would navigate it, and those who are well-skilled teachers understand lessons objectives and the activities, and we're just going to look at 2 of the resources that really illustrate how teachers enter into a complicated topic such as nonviolence. Remembering what you thought of at the very beginning, where did you get your reference point? We're going to now look at a film clip, short film clip, that really digs into nonviolence. And you can find all of these, if you would click here, you go right to the film clips and right to the interviews. So we're going to look at the first film clip here, Sick and Tired, and I think you're going to pull it up back there.
from the moment that the civil rights leaders rushed in to continue James Meredith's march, there's been a struggle to see whose philosophy would guide the steps. The philosophical struggle deepened as the march column moved deeper into Mississippi. The voice of Stokely Carmichael, young leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, spoke louder and louder. At Greenwood, he sounded the march's new rallying call.
It's time we stand up and take over. We want black power. We want black power. We want black power. We want black power.
In SNCC, we saw a changing movement tactically. Our focus was on empowering communities,
We don't have to be ashamed of it.
not only politically, but in terms of culture and identity.
What do you want? That's what we gonna get.
What they were basically saying is that black people needed to appreciate black. And it wasn't a color, it was a culture. When I was growing up, to call a person of color black was considered derogatory. Those were fighting words. But there was a term that was used as well during that period, white power.
Stokely Carmichael gets control of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he purges the organization of all white people. He said, you go back and work in your community. We want to have total control. It rippled throughout the movement.
I will never forget Dr. King's face when Black Power first began to emerge. He looked like the most stricken man.
We must never forget there are some white people in the United States just as determined to see us free as we are to be free ourselves.
We were taught that there were good people and bad people, and we never viewed this as black against white. We're taught that racism was a sickness, and you don't get mad with sick people. They just don't know any better. They've been taught that they are better than you.
What do you mean when you shout black power to these people back here?
I mean that they are oppressed because they are black, and their rallying cry must be black power, so that they can use that to ensure justice for themselves.
Martin's very uncomfortable, but he knows that he has to be there to support the courage of Stokely Carmichael without supporting the message or the form of the message. Dr. King was not opposed to power, but to elevate so-called black power over white power would break that which he was seeking to build, the coalition among white and black people.
I feel that while believing firmly that power is necessary, that it would be difficult for me to use the phrase black power because of the connotative meaning that it has for many people and the feeling that this may represent a desire to rise from a position of disadvantage to one of advantage, thereby subverting justice. On the other hand,
Some of the people on the march were intimidated by the whole effort of black power.
They must ask themselves why they are afraid of the word black and why they're afraid of the phrase black power. And
As long as we were talking about nonviolence and all that kind of thing, everybody felt comfortable.
Do you think they're really afraid of it or just feel that it's not a good thing?
Anytime when we talk about black people having power, the assumption is that black people want to be violent against white people.
Mr. Carmichael, are you as committed to the nonviolent approach as Dr. King is?
No, I'm not.
Why aren't you?
Well, I just don't see it as a way of life. I never have. I grew up in the slums of New York, and I learned there that the only way that one survived was to use his fists. I realized
When Stokely became chairman of SNCC, he had a different approach.
And for me, it's always been a tactic and never a way of life.
He believed in self-defense.
Could you comment on that, Dr. King?
the Negro has an opportunity to inject morality in the veins of our civilization, and for this reason, I will continue to preach nonviolence. I will continue to...
Martin was an amazingly tolerant, understanding father figure for all of us. He understood Stokely's frustrations, and he never took it personally. I think Dr. King never forgot that we were all on the same side. He didn't have any enemies.
What I remember was the listening, the patience. He was always there. to say I don't go there, but I want to really understand why you go there. But that was the first real breach in the nonviolence commitment that many of us had grown to accept.
I'm sick and tired of violence. I'm tired of shooting. I'm tired of hate. I'm tired of selfishness. I'm tired of evil. I'm not going to use violence, no matter who says it.
I had not, before meeting Dr. King, ever taken the option of violence off the table. We are a minority living in the belly of the beast. When Dr. King stepped in, he methodically would look at violence and challenge those who would seek the gun as the solution. Because morally, you cannot defeat the enemy by becoming the enemy. But Stokely really believed that in the long run, the gun was going to have to be the answer.
And we begged the president, we begged the federal government. That's all we've been doing.
I accuse Stokely of being just an angry, frustrated young man.
It's time we stand up and take over. Every courthouse in Mississippi ought to be burned down tomorrow to get rid of the dirt.
Anger eats away at your own soul, and it hurts you. Everybody has a right to be angry. Everybody has a right to be frustrated. But if you give in to your anger and your frustrations, you know, you're gonna lose.
So if I were in a classroom right now, I'm sure all the teachers are like, okay, what would we do next? And I could see it in the audience. I could see people talking already. There's a lot to unpack in this clip in 6 minutes. And we've had the fortune of starting our evening with these folks in person. And translating that into a classroom for teachers is really what this platform is about and what this initiative is about, is how do we help navigate these very complicated issues, this complicated time, in a way that's not simplistic, but allows students to layer and unpack and sort of peel their own onion of sorts to understand that. So as you see on the left-hand column there, in the lesson's objectives, there's a key question that we have, and in this one is, what can we understand about social movements by studying the strategy, tactics, and philosophy of nonviolence? That's where we would start. We could show a clip like this, or we could go to an interview clip, which is what we're going to do in a minute. Of the many, many interviews, we were also fortunate to be able to watch and figure out how to thread topics that these eyewitnesses brought together. So we have created threads for teachers to use so they don't have to go and watch all those, although they can, because they're online on YouTube, but they're short on time. So we have allowed them to have access to interview threads so students can start to hear these voices like we heard tonight in their classrooms. Imagine that. Imagine the power of those voices in our students' lives and how that can be transformative. And it already has, and it already will. So we're going to watch one final interview thread, and this is the raw footage. It's a clip that we took out of a longer clip. It would be, if you were a teacher, you would go to interviews. You would see we have 3 interview threads here that are just particular to nonviolence. Each of the 6 lessons has film clips, it has interview threads, and it has resources, either photographs or primary source documents that teachers can access that are particular to King in the Wilderness, that are very specific to the years 65 through 68. So it's ready-made, it's turnkey, teachers have it for them to use and be flexible with. So we're gonna listen to Diane Nash, which her is thread 1, we're calling it here. It's the beginning of a longer thread. It's a 12-minute thread, but we're just gonna listen to the first part of it. It's a wonderful story that we feel really further complicates this idea of nonviolence through her perspective and her story. And after her story, Ayanna Gabriel's going to come up and we'll have our final panel. So we'll end with Diane Nash in terms of the educational resources. But I really hope that you will go home. I'm going to say the URL one more time, www.kuhnhartfilmfoundation.org. And please, if you're not a teacher, give it to a teacher. If you know a teacher, give them a gift, and please pass that along. And we'll start continuing to do trainings. We'll be here October 9th for a training with all, well, not all, I wish, Atlanta Public School teachers. We have a half-day training just on this platform. So there's more information about that. If you know a teacher, they can start registering for that tomorrow. So we'll end with Diane Nash here. Thank you.
I grew up in this violent society, and I stayed with those nonviolent workshops in Nashville for one reason, and that was it was the only game in town. There was no other organization trying to eliminate segregation. I really doubted that nonviolence would work, but I also could not just do nothing about segregation. I found it so humiliating. Blacks could not use public libraries, swimming pools, hotels, motels, restaurants. It was possible for blacks to buy food at a downtown restaurant, but you couldn't sit down and eat. You had to take it on a carry-out basis. So if you went to downtown Nashville during the lunch hour, the blacks that worked in the downtown area would be sitting along the curbs, along the alleys, eating their lunch that they had either brought from home or purchased on a takeout basis from a local restaurant. When I obeyed segregation rules, I felt awful. I felt like I was agreeing that I was too inferior to use the accommodations that the general public used. So my commitment was to eliminate segregation. The nonviolent workshops were the only organization that I could find that the only people trying to do something about eliminating segregation. So we had the success for the first couple of years, the lunch counters and restaurants and freedom rides. And then the violent poetry was surfacing, and people who did not believe in nonviolence. And at a certain point, I thought, well, of course, violence is more powerful than nonviolence. And I decided I wouldn't be nonviolent. Well, about a year passed. The only thing that I had done was read a lot of poetry, have a lot of conversation about how blood had to flow in the street. And I had not been to the rifle range. I had not learned to make a bomb, or let alone use one. I had come to the conclusion that you'd have to be kind of stupid to do illegal things with people that you did not know well. Therefore, it was not possible to build a mass-based movement using violence. And when I looked back on that year, I decided that I personally was more powerful using nonviolence. So I came full circle and moved from using it as a tactic to using it as a way of life. Because it makes sense in so many ways. Usually when people carry out violent movements, they're really trying to achieve something good, achieve a better world. And you don't do that by harming people. If you kill somebody's friend or brother or child or mother or father, it's not going to create good feelings and brotherhood and sisterhood and harmony like people would prefer. Very often, when there's violence, the press will cover the violence and ignore the issue. They will cover the violence in great detail. You know, I remember the convention, the Democratic convention in Chicago. If you read the accounts, they'll say on this corner, this violence was happening, and meanwhile across the street in Grant Park, and they'll describe some violence there, and then they'll go on. The whole article will be violence, and the issues will be absolutely ignored. So I took note of a number of things such as that and decided that nonviolence is a more powerful way of making change, because often with violence you attack individuals and you leave the system or the real problem untouched. With the amount and the different kinds of violence that have been used over the centuries, if violence improved things and made a better world, we'd be in utopia by now. So clearly, it doesn't bring a better world.
Hi, everyone. Hey, my name is Ayana Gabriel. I'm with the Blanc Family Foundation. I've had the pleasure of working with Cunard Films and Blue Shift on getting these educator resources together. So unfortunately, we are going to pause in the second panel because we know that we are at time. We wanted to make sure that we gave Dr. LaFayette and Dr. Vivian and Mr. Branch the majority of the time. So I just want to say some closing remarks. First of all, I just want to give a round of applause to Cunard Films, to Peter Cunard. His son, Matthew Anderson, who's also here, who's going to be on the panel, if you can wave your hand, and Fran Sterling, who you had a chance to meet, for putting this together. I would say as a former classroom teacher, part of the reasons we showed this clips is this is not easy stuff. And oftentimes, when we think about the lessons of the film and Dr. King's work, we simplify what's happened. We simplify it for young people, and then we wonder why they don't understand. So I appreciate having the opportunity to work with Blue Shift and Cunard Films to take the complexity, to take the nuances and the layers and make it available. So I just want to give one more plug for that. I also want to thank Atlanta Public Schools, who are going to be the first who are going to be part of the workshop. And also, I think we have some people here from Drew Charter High School who will be hosting on October 9th. That'll be for Atlanta Public School teachers. But as of now, this website is live. So anybody who's an educator, anybody who knows an educator or a teacher, or if you yourself want to learn more about this, please go to the website. It's cunardfilmfoundation.org. And also for all of our funders in the room and supporters, we've already had a ton of interest in having this materials available to kids. And so we're thinking about doing more workshops in spring. So I want to thank everyone for coming, and have a good evening.